But it was no surprise when I saw this, popped on TalkSPORT, and the voice I hear talking to Adrian Durham and the guys on Drive about this, unsurprisingly, was the AP's Rob Harris, because he's a man very much in the know about these things, and brilliantly Rob's been able to join us in the studio now. Rob, that was probably, 5 or 6 hours ago now since this news first dropped. Being able to stand back from it a little bit and react a bit more kind of considered than just immediately in the moment. What's your response to everything we've seen happen this evening with Man City?
I think many fans, when they originally heard these allegations emerged a year or so ago, probably didn't think UEFA would actually come down hard on Manchester City. They've seen probably so many cases across so many areas where they haven't really imposed rigorous sanctions, but this is a really seismic ruling, a really big call to ban one of the biggest teams in world football from your elite competition for 2 seasons. I mean, it's, for many, I think, probably a sanction that they thought might have been imposed 6 years ago when we had the original case of Manchester City overspending and breaching FFP.
I mean, there's obviously been a huge amount happened since the emails were first leaked, which led to this investigation over the kind of last 18 months or so. But, I mean, how much do you think that 2014 ruling does affect the ruling today? Because I think you saw the speed of response from Man City. It was clear that they knew that something was coming, but maybe didn't know how severe it was going to be, the punishment.
Yeah, they were informed today following a hearing on January the 22nd. I mean, it was not a re-airing necessarily of the old case. It was because new information came out. UEFA discovered all this new stuff from the leak showing how there'd been attempts to circumvent the rules, attempt to manipulate some of the finances, as the leak show. City, of course, do deny wrongdoing, but it shows just the level of mechanisms that are involved, an attempt to ensure they could spend and strengthen the squad and try to comply with the rules. But that verdict from many years ago when they did manage to avoid the Champions League ban, it was certainly not the end of it, and this also covers a period beyond there too, and what a big loss it's going to be for Manchester City, not only not being in the Champions League but all the money as well.
Before we get into their response, just how much of a loss is it for Man City, not just to the prestige of the club, to, we'll talk about the impact of Pep Guardiola and the ability to attract players, but purely financially it's got to be a huge loss in itself as well.
Yeah, they're losing almost 100 million euros alone from UEFA prize money, TV money. That's if they were to reach the quarterfinals again as they did last season. So that's a hefty loss from the balance sheet, particularly as they look to need to sign players, and you've also got the gate receipts taken into account there as well. They won't have European games at all as it stands for 2 seasons, so that's many empty nights at City, and that's a potential loss of more than 200 or so million euros, assuming that they were to be progressing through to the knockout stages into the coming seasons. Something
I've heard certainly from City fans so far, and from those who are looking at this process and are questioning the UEFA perspective of it. And City referenced it themselves in their statement, saying, simply put, this is a case initiated by UEFA, prosecuted by UEFA, and judged by UEFA. This idea that they can't be the judge, jury, and executioner. But, I mean, my understanding was they are the governing body, so of course they should be the people who are going through this process. I mean, do Man City have a legitimate gripe about that?
I mean, there is an independent disciplinary process. There are some independent figures on there. Manchester City certainly do know, because when a former Belgian Prime Minister was hearing their case back 6 or so years ago, one of the internal emails, the veracity of which has not been challenged by City, celebrated the death of the former Belgian Prime Minister. 1 down, 6 to go. So they can't doubt the identities of those on the panels. I mean, how independent is anything? There are independent figures on there. They will be questioning, I would suspect, the source of the information. It all came via these leaks. The alleged person involved in that is a Portuguese man, Rui Pinto. He's now actually awaiting trial in Portugal, charged with computer offences, including hacking, directly related to Portuguese cases, not to this. So, that's one area that Manchester City could go after, but they really weren't on the front foot with their defence when these fresh allegations first came out in November 2018. I think they hoped it would sort of wash away, and we only really started to see several months later an attempt to sort of talk about the out of context nature and criticise some of the information. But what they've never done is disputed the authenticity or mounted a significant defence. I mean, they could say they were saving it for the actual UEFA process. And what we've heard now on Friday is the fact that they are going to go to the Court of Arbitration of Sport to appeal against this ban. And what happens at the Court of Arbitration for Sport is we then see an entire verdict. We see loads of information come out there, details of the case and each side's argument, and that sheds a really bigger light on the complexities of investigations like this. And
it is a more complex issue, because I was saying this to you before we went on air, but when I think of financials, I think of black and white. I think of numbers on a spreadsheet, and those feel irrefutable to me. Obviously, this is something where it's about how the money has been channeled and where it's come from, and whether they've been honest in the declaration of how much money has come from which source. And that has to be something that you have to find deeper ways of proving it. But if you do have emails which state that there is some kind of cover up here and the facts and figures there, I mean, how can you hope to mount a successful appeal against this outside of saying, well, the ban feels a bit harsh when you look at other cases, maybe try and get it bartered down? But I'm Man City are very much believing, they talked about irrefutable proof, that they're going to get this completely thrown out and get it completely overturned.
Yeah, I mean, even if they were to have it halved in length, obviously that's still a one-season ban. We have seen other UEFA sanctions reduced, such as Chelsea's transfer ban from 2 to 1 window. This is obviously a far more complex case than UEFA normally has to deal with. I mean, so much of this we would never have known about had it not been for the leaks. This isn't being able to read off a balance sheet as we could all do a few years ago and spot some of the sources of revenue. This is showing that despite even above and beyond all those original questions about Manchester City having a lot of sponsors from Abu Dhabi, where their owners are from, this was actually showing that Etihad and others, while they were paying for the sponsorships in Manchester City, a company ultimately linked to Manchester City itself back in Abu Dhabi was paying some of that money back into Etihad. So it was a funneling of money that we would never have known about, but for the fact they were concocting this alleged plan by email, and the fact that we've now discovered just the breadth of it. Of course, this whole issue of state ownership, something that the La Liga president Javier Tebas has been going on about, saying that it's distorting European competition, having Qatar owning PSG, Abu Dhabi owning Manchester City. And certainly when the verdict came in on Friday, Javier Tebas was feeling vindicated that finally UEFA were starting to act on Manchester City. But this was not a ruling per se against the merits of state ownership. And, you know, when there are sponsorships linked to the state, they always UEFA try to discover the fair value. What is the fair value of sponsoring a stadium or the kit, and ensuring that it's not overinflated? And that's just one level of it, and it just shows the breadth of investigations required to try to enforce these financial fair play rules.
If there isn't more information to come out from Manchester City's side, if they haven't been, as you suggested, potentially holding something back or having there's something more for them to reveal based on just the information that we have available to us now, going from the emails to the ruling today to everything CAS have said. I mean, Man City's attempts to get the case thrown out as well. Do you believe without any further information, Man City have a good chance when they go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport?
I mean, one of the things that Manchester City will argue when the case is heard is the fact that there were leaks during the investigation. And I have to declare my interest, the fact that Manchester City have already gone to Court of Arbitration for Sport once in recent months to highlight reports, including some of my own, and questioning how that information about the investigation came out into the public. But at the time, that was Manchester City trying to just stop UEFA continuing the investigation, and CAS ruled that the investigation could continue. Now we've reached the end point. They could investigate again and question, was there some faults in the process? The fact that people like me discovered elements of it on the line, including one of the things Manchester City complained about in the earlier CAS case was the fact that I discovered they'd even gone to CAS with this quite unusual step to block the case being passed from the investigation side to the judiciary. So they'll be looking to try to challenge UEFA and all their inner workings as well. But ultimately, the heart of it is it comes down to a potential bad faith. When they struck the deal with UEFA to avoid the Champions League ban in 2014, if you're on the UEFA side, and obviously it's a different leadership now there, you would hope that City were acting in good faith in telling them everything about the sponsorships, how the club was being financed. But what now emerges 6 years on, based on this, is they weren't, because the leak showed various mechanisms to try to ensure that they could comply above and beyond. Because, men might forget actually the fact we have already gone through this once when they were found to be massively overspending beyond the rules.
I think it was 180 million when they're only allowed to be 45 overspend or something like that on that.
Yeah, and even then they were fined 60 million euros, but then got refunded another 40 million of it, and they had some squad limits. But, that was seen at the time as, some might see it as UEFA caving in and not banning a big team and PSG at the same time. So certainly there's been a transformation in terms of the firmness of UEFA to implement big and meaningful sanctions.
It's fascinating, and honestly, that from the Man City side, like as I've already been saying previously, the kind of the aggression and almost the level of arrogance with which they've approached their front-facing or their fan-facing approach to this entire process. I think it's going to be fascinating to see where it goes going forward. Interesting piece from Miguel Delaney off the back of this around whether they could face a Premier League points deduction. Is that something that you can see? What's the mechanism for that? What's the reasoning that they could? Because the fact is that financial fair play is different between European competition and our domestic competition, but why are the two linked, and why could this potentially affect Man City domestically?
Well, the Premier League are investigating Manchester City still, because City have had to abide by Premier League spending rules as well. And what we saw from these leaks is the fact that there were these alleged manipulations going on in terms of the source of the funding. So the Premier League needs to look at, was the information that they judge Manchester City's compliance with its spending rules on fair? Was it the accurate information? Were they being given the full and accurate picture? I mean, also, you've got authorities here who are based in terms of conversations with UEFA about the exchange of information to ensure City get their licence to play in Europe. Ultimately, all this is about a club licensing scheme to ensure you pass the necessary tests. You're paying your bills, you've not got these outstanding debts, you're paying the players and complying with financial fair play. So, information has been shared by City here with the likes of the Premier League as well to ensure that certificate, that licence is granted by UEFA. So that will now be a big focus in terms of what do the Premier League do, because you've got other owners sitting round that Premier League table from the other 19 clubs who will want a level playing field in terms of how sanctions are implied. I mean, John Henry, when he bought Liverpool, one of the reasons he said he was able to buy it and wanted to buy it was because of financial fair play. He thought it would actually mean that they wouldn't have to necessarily pump masses of money in beyond their means and potentially damage their financial ability because of these financial fair play rules. So Liverpool is certainly a club who always, you get the impression, want to see FFP enforced fully. So the spotlight does now shift back to here as well.
When will we know about the idea of whether or not fifth place gets a Champions League spot, whether the Europa League spots are then extended? Because, I mean, surely this isn't a Premier League issue, and therefore they shouldn't suffer with their number of teams getting in the Champions League.
No, and it would seem particularly wrong, I think, if England did not get its 4 spots still from the Champions League. I mean, we have had a similar case in Italy when AC Milan were no longer in the Europa League this season, and the places were redistributed down Serie A. So there's already a precedent there in terms of a country keeping its places. So I think very much so that England would still have the 4 places, which now opens up this intriguing battle for 5th. We thought it was all going to be about 4th, but now, throwing Sheffield United into the mix, Wolves even still in there, Spurs, United trying to push in there. It certainly livens things up, as the title race itself is very much not a race.
With that in mind, where do we know what the timescale is on this? Because this was purely kind of the way my brain was wrapping around it when I was watching Leicester Wolves earlier, which took on an additional wrinkle because of this 5th place thing. But if you're finishing 4th, 5th, and you've got to go through preliminary rounds or qualification rounds, potentially on the Champions League or the Europa League, what's our timescale on this? Because a club could finish 5th not knowing whether or not that's a Champions League place or a Europa League place if they haven't finished going through the process with CAS and everything else, surely.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. It does need a July resolution for this in terms of the knock-on effect further down Europa League qualifying, because obviously the further down you get to the Premier League table, then teams have to start in July, as we've seen with Wolves. Remarkably, how many games they're on now, having sort of started right in the middle of July there. So, yeah, there is actually an urgency to actually get this case resolved in terms of what we're in February now, and July is 5 months away. So there is time for the appeals to go. It depends if there's a more complex scenario around the appeal process. And CAS, though, is used to quick cases. It's used to dealing with stuff around the Olympics as well. Manchester City, though, as we've seen throughout this process, they lawyer up. They get all the lawyers possible to try to stymie UEFA. Whenever I've heard of various meetings that have gone on, they've brought a lot of lawyers there from various firms, and they have a determination to try to sort of pull all the brains of the legal profession out there and put them up against UEFA. So it could be interesting, and it's going to have an extra intriguing level of discussion in the next few months. We wait to find out the dates of the hearing itself in Switzerland and just how long any verdict will take. Well,
Rob Harris will be all over that as and when it does happen, and it's well worth giving him a follow on Twitter when this stuff's happening, at Rob Harris, because clarity can be so key with these things, and that's why we've kind of spent 15 minutes going through exactly what the process has been and will be. Obviously, there's a huge footballing impact as well, and so we want to hear from you on that 08717 223344. If you're a Man City fan, do you fear for what it means for your squad, what it means for Pep Guardiola, and what it means for the Premier League in general? I mean, I'm not expecting Liverpool to recreate this season every year for the next 5 years, but whenever a team comes out and has a dominant year like they have this year, we needed last year to have Liverpool emerge to challenge Man City, to make sure we didn't have back-to-back years where it was like, how we have seen from leagues like the Bundesliga in the past. Liverpool's season has been so astounding that actually, Man City, for a neutral, you need them to be challenging in the Premier League, ideally, and it makes it much more exciting if they are. So, yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens on that side of things as well. Rob, what's your weekend look like now? Are you just going to be poring over legal documents and having to go deep dives into CAS previous cases and looking for precedent? And are you all over this all weekend now?
Yeah, hoping to sort of shed more light on it, what it means for the club, what it means for football in general, what it means for financial fair play rules, and also try to catch some football as well in this sort of slightly strange winter break that we've had.
Brilliant stuff. Really appreciate your time. Rob Harris joining us in the studio on TalkSPORT Extra Time. We'll take your calls. 08717 223344 up next.
You can get all the opinions in the world, but nothing will be as convincing as your own